So basically, the errors which might be intentional or unintentional are drawn into this aspect. So the intentional error might mean cheating by the interviewer or leading the respondents or giving cues to the respondents. The unintentional error would be the interviewer characteristics which might not go well with the interviewee and the misunderstandings and fatigues which happen or the tiredness which a field worker experiences while conducting the process. Again, in the respondent error, we have falsehood or false promises which happens. The non-responses would be where the interviewee altogether decides not to answer, and the misunderstanding, the guessing, the attention loss, the distraction and the fatigues will be dealt in unintentional error. So the possible reasons for intentional fieldworker errors are such that when the interviewer collects the data by willfully violating with the data collection requirements set forth by the researcher. So in such a process, what happens is the interviewer cheats and he intentionally misrepresents the respondents. Then we also have the concept of leading respondents where the interviewer influences the respondents by wording, change of voice, laying emphasis on certain words and body language. Now, the possible reasons for unintentional field error could be where the interviewer believes that he or she is performing correctly. Now, these errors occur because of the interviewer's personal characteristics such as accent, sex, and demeanor. The intentional respondent error occurs because the respondent loses his interest in the survey process. Then there are lots of distractions which might let him to do away with the questionnaire as much as possible, and also probably the respondent might be tired. Now the possible reasons for an unintentional respondent error are probably the respondent misunderstands what the interviewer is trying to ask him and he comprehends it on his own basis, or probably he tries to guess what the responses are meant to be and they answer it inaccurately. Now, this is where we come to. So, in intentional fieldwork errors, the cheating and leading of responses occur. So, how will you mend it? By supervision and validation. Then unintentional fieldwork errors occurs where the interviewer's characteristics, the misunderstandings and fatigue plays a primary role. So how will you deal with it? You will lay emphasis on the process of selecting and training your interviewees. Then also you will see how the orientation sessions help in playing a role. Fatigue requires breaks and alternative survey strategies which you have to find out. Now the measures to control data collection errors in case of respondents either will give you false information. So the supervisor and the researcher should ensure anonymity and confidentiality. That is, the trust should not be broken. Then you should give incentives. Incentives can be money incentives or incentives can be of other types. Then validation checks and third person techniques. So, if a person is feeling uncomfortable to address or answer certain questions, then what happens is you do a third person technique where the third person acts as a mediator and he helps to fine tune the process. Non-responses, of course, you employ the same thing. You ensure the confidence and anonymity. You ensure incentives and you also employ third person techniques. Now what are the non-response errors? The non-response errors primarily occur when there is a failure on the part of a prospective respondent to take part in a survey or to answer specific questions of the survey. So, for example, we are constructing a survey on whether toilets are being incorporated in Indian households. So some matriarch or patriarch might completely do away with the idea and they refuse to participate in the survey. Then they break off during the interview. They do not want to answer it beyond the point. So they'll be like, this practice is going on from age old time, so who are you to question it? Then they refuse to answer certain questions. For example, if you are conducting a survey on child marriage, so the first will be they will refuse to participate in that survey process itself because of the fear that they might get arrested. Then they break off during the interview. You might come across lines like, "ये क्या बेहुदा सवाल आप पूछ रहे हो?" That is, what question are you asking? It does not even make any sense to me. Probably it is making total sense to the person, but the person refuses to answer it. Then he refuses to answer certain questions. Now the completed interview must be defined, that is, it should be acceptable by certain levels of non-answered question types. Now, what are the examples of non-response errors? Now, problems occur because the people responding to the questionnaire differ significantly from those who are not responding. So, the examples of non-response is there because of the mindset of the respondents and the mindset of the interviewee. There is also a notion of possible self-selection bias. For example, the survey of 500 students to see if they need transportation to and from the school. So 50 students will say yes, and you have to conclude that all 450 students that did not answer do not need it. So do you make a correct conclusion in this hypothetical situation? Of course not. You do not know the needs of the remaining 450 students. So what is happening here is you are yourself creating an error in the research process by believing on the non-response which you have received from the remaining 450 participants. The next is the measurement error. Now, since 100% control for precise and ambiguous measurement of variable is unattainable, therefore error occurs. Now, much potential error is systematic, that is, it results from a bias, and while the remainder is random, that is, it occurs erratically. So the sources of measurement differences are the respondents, obviously. Then you have statistical factors, the measurer or the researcher factors, and the data collection instruments. Now, the next is, how will you measure a non-response error? So, here the response rate enumerates the percentage of total sample with which the interview was completed. So, this is not mathematical, but usually you have a Castro response rate. Now, in this Castro response rate, what we do, we see the number of completions and we divide it by completions plus the completion divided by completion plus the ineligible into the refusal of the reach and non-reach. So, for example, if we were to conduct with the previous experiment, how many people were reach and non-reach, we take a mean of 400, and with that we conclude the sample size to be of 70% of the people who have responded to the entire situation. Now, how will you treat non-response errors? Now, non-response errors can be treated through mail surveys, advance notification, monetary incentives, and follow-up mailings. Then there will also be telephone surveys and callback attempts. So, mail surveys will let you know that on the time period from say the 1st to the 15th, we are conducting a research study on a day-to-day basis and you are expected to be there. Monetary incentives, per day you devote to the particular research study, you will get an incentive of say 1000 rupees. You follow up the mailings, you will see You will track whether the person has received and understood the terms and he is willing to commit to the research or not. Then you have telephonic surveys where you call and you ask them in case the person refuses to answer to your questions, then you again call back and make sure that the respondent is available. Now, how will you avoid non-response? Now, care in construction of the questionnaire, particularly in the opening parts to gain the respondent's interest, should be taken. So, when you are giving a questionnaire to a person, you should take care that the interviewer who has designed the questionnaire should take care that the interviewee does not find the questions intimidating. The interviewee is well aware of the needs of answering the questionnaire. It is to his area of interest. If not, he should be stimulated so that he makes an effort to at least do the questionnaire for the study's sake. So the interviewer plays a primal role here. The interviewer should be trained to build rapport with the respondent. Then the telephone can be used to schedule interviews. Callback should be made to avoid non-respondence. In case the interviewer finds that the interviewee is not responding to his phone calls, he should make calls again and again. He should be persistent enough so that he gets an idea. Then, in door-to-door survey, the questionnaire can be left on the door if the respondent is usually unavailable, and follow-ups are highly essential. Then you should also avoid personal questions early on in the interview. So if you were to construct a study on the notion of menstrual hygiene in a family, you do not directly ask how enlightened are you with the concept of menstrual hygiene, and will you click a photo with the displaying of a pad? You won't. What will you do? You will avoid personal questions early on in the interview. You will firstly begin the interview by explaining it to the interviewee about the entire process and what are your intentions of carrying out with this process and so on. So the interview should be worded in such a manner that it does not hurt the intentions of the interviewee in any manner, or it does not make the interviewee or the respondent challenged in any manner, so that he thinks that based on his IQ he will not be giving the interview. Now, what are the steps for motivating respondents? Now, motivating respondents is an important aspect of the data collection process. Now, the introduction aspect should make the respondent to try and conscientiously report accurately and fully. The respondent must be assured of the confidentiality. Now, detailed instructions motivate the respondents to answer to the questions. Now, if the questions stated are manipulated according to the respondent's capacity, then probably the respondent might be motivated enough to give an answer. You can also try to motivate respondents by changing their tone and giving cues to carry on with the process. So what is happening here is, for example, if we are conducting the interview, we should make sure that the questionnaire itself is self-explanatory and the questionnaire itself is enjoyable enough to make you want to give the interview. Then what happens is you achieve a degree of accurateness, and when you assure full amount of confidentiality and you motivate the respondents to answer, then the question stated can be manipulated according to the respondent's capacity. And you can also motivate the respondents by changing their tone and giving them cues or ideas which would help them to carry on with the process. Now, steps to be followed while administering the questionnaire. So the questionnaire should be kept relatively short and crisp. The size of the questionnaire should be minimum. A longer questionnaire, people refuse to totally answer it. The question should proceed in a logical sequence, moving from easy to more difficult questions. Personal and intimate questions should be left to the end. You cannot force someone to answer personal questions right away, for the person might find it disgusting and might simply not cooperate with the rest of the study. Technical terms and vague expressions capable of different interpretations should be avoided in the questionnaire. What is the meaning of psychomachia? You don't know what psychomachia is? It is good over evil, gone. You know what psychomachia is and you are giving me a philosophical interpretation and you are lost there, gone again. You are giving me a theosophical interpretation of a good and evil victory which might not be the relevance of my study. Again, we lose it there. Then, questions may be dichotomous, yes or no, or multiple choice questions or open-ended questions. Then, open-ended questions again being difficult to analyze should be avoided in the questionnaire as much as possible. Questions affecting the sentiments of the respondents should be avoided. Adequate space should be provided in the questionnaire to help in the editing and tabulation. And there should always be provisions for indicating uncertainty. So, if you do not know or you do not prefer that option, you should make it clear. Then, brief directions with regards to filling the questionnaire should be given in the questionnaire itself. So, in the absence of the interviewer, the interviewee knows how to carry on with the process. Finally, the physical appearance of the questionnaire should also be attractive to help the interviewee answer the questionnaire. Now, errors in simulating responses in questionnaire method. So, in spite of taking these precautions as mentioned in the previous slide, there are instances where the respondents do not understand the questions. So, in addition to the interviews which are sometimes not competent with the meaning of the questions, you should make sure that it is necessary to probe with the respondents for additional information, but again this would lead to biasness and errors. Now, one way of handling this issue is to use a tape recorder. Now, what happens is when you use a tape recorder, basically you are recording the statements. So, however, though it increases the accuracy in lower classes, the upper class people might tend to not divulge in the details in the presence of the tape recorder for the fear of being recorded on point. Now, what are the steps you should follow while recording? So, while recording, you should make sure that each question must be exactly asked and recorded as it is in the questionnaire. Now, the interviewer must not comment on the meaning or indicate the type of answers that are acceptable, because that again might lead to bias, thereby leading to errors in your research study. Now, the interviewer should be trained in providing uniform additional clarifications to the respondents. So, if the interviewer follows the exact sequence of questions given in the questionnaire, probably that seriality will help the respondent to relate and answer the questions. And they should all have uniform tone and emphasis. You cannot personally show your mental mindset while taking an interview, because that would hinder the response process. Now, measures to stop overstimulation while recording. So, the interviewer should be trained to achieve uniformity in the style of interviewing. The supervisors can also listen to each of them as they work and then take the corrective actions. Fewer respondents in telephonic interviews means that there is an averaging bias which has taken place, and this averaging bias is probably not sufficient to carry on with the research study. Now, what are the effects of interviewer on the respondents? The age, the race, the income, the sex, and the other characteristics of the interviewer have been found to accept the responses. So, lower income group people tend to give answers to the interviewers which they think are socially acceptable, and they want people to hear about it. The middle class interviewers receive more constructive answers from the lower income group people than the working class interviewers, because they think that, okay, these people are able to relate to our social distress, because once upon a time probably he has also undergone a similar situation. Then older interviewers are presumed to be authoritarian in nature, and hence the respondents in the end try to modify their answers based on what they think appropriate by the physical characteristics of the interviewer. So that again hinders our interview process. Now, what are the errors in recording answers? Now, recording is usually done on clipboards or door-to-door surveys. So the discomfort in writing is one reason where we find an error in the entire recording process. Now, the errors in telephonic interviews are relatively lesser due to the presence of proper writing pads, desk, and other appropriate materials like true colors and all. Moreover, while trying to record answers as fast as possible, they could also record inaccurately. Then the space for responding is also very essential, and the way an interviewer handles the resistance in case of any data collection is also crucial. Now, what happens when the interviewer cheats? Now, cheating is a frequent menace which research organizations tend to deal with day in and out. So, armchair interviewing or filing the response sheets by themselves is a factor of worry. So, armchair interviewing or filing the response by the interviewer, they to the answers, and the sampling, which takes place over large pockets, experimental units, is not carried out. So that leads to a delay in the overall process of authentic data collection due to the significantly visible errors because of the falsification of data, and also because they answer the questions on their own. Now, what are the main reasons for cheating? Personality characteristics are very inherent in interviews. So, if a mindset that he is not going to work with a proper integrity, and he is not going to work with a proper mindset, or he is not going to give all towards the research study, then of course the personality characteristics will lead in the overall process. Then there is difficulty in locating and interviewing respondents. So if the respondents are not willing to give answers, if they are not willing to be interviewed, the owner interviewee to interview, find out the person, take the data which you need to take. So if that is not happening, then the interviewer is frustrated with the process and he takes to cheating. Then unrealistic deadlines forces interviewers to take shortcuts. For example, if you are supposed to conduct a sample field study and give it within 3 days, it's practically not possible if you are not using digital means. If you expect a field work research to take place, the researcher, even though he is a good one, committed one, he might not be able to go on field immediately because of his prior commitment. So those factors should be kept in mind. Then the interviewers, not knowing the importance of the job and ignorance of what is expected to them, can cause low morale in the groups. So if you go to a polling site in a rural area, and out of the 5 people, if one person is persistent on creating the polling system and identifying the pros and cons of why effective polling do not take place in the rural areas properly, so he will give up at the end of the process when he finds the remaining people are not cooperating or the respondents are not willing to cooperate, or the situations could be such extreme that there might be a hamper in his life quality. So what they do, they simply fill the questionnaires themselves and give a mixed bag of responses, thereby wasting the government's efforts, thereby wasting the organization's efforts, their efforts, and public money. So at the end, who is the loser? The society at large is the loser, because it also detrimentally affects the policy making decisions. Moreover, if questions are embarrassing for both the groups, that is the respondents and the interviewed people, then also we drop off with the entire process. Now, how do you control the cheating? Now, though it is not fully possible to control these factors, yet the research directors can take initiatives to control and minimize the data collection errors. So basically, the supervisors are not effective in door-to-door survey samples, yet they help. Then training is very important to remove the interviewer biases, and telephonic interviews are one in which, if a telephonic interview is not taking place properly, then he or she, the supervisor, can go and check if the interviews are conducted in a proper manner or not. So we come to the end of this module, and by going through the slides which has been discussed in this module, we have basically learned in today's class about fieldwork procedure, the various personal interviews in terms of fieldwork which are conducted, the telephonic interviews for fieldwork, the common thoroughly discussed. The errors in selecting the responses have been done in detail, along with non-response errors and the reasons why the non-response errors are seen to be a prominent occurrence, how they are measured, how will you treat them, how the stimulation or motivation causes errors in your data collection process, and how these errors of recording and interpreting the answers can be measured and dealt with. So with this, we come towards the end of our Unit 6 of Research Methodology, and by this, now I am confident enough that you are now aware of the fieldwork procedures, and you are acquainted with the procedures which goes into making of the fieldwork process a success, and also the ways and means by which we use the data collection errors to gauge them, analyze them, and also come with suitable means on how to stop these errors. Thank you once again.